Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello there, it's Crazy Ivan. It's been a little while, but I'm back here with a video this time, something a little bit different. And I want to talk about obviously, you can see on the screen there, the upcoming Earth to Iron 1 versus 1 Return of Rome tournament. I know it's been a little while since we've held an event, so hopefully people are excited for this one. It's good to see that quite a lot of people have already signed up for the tournament. Hopefully we get a few more in the next week or so before the tournament actually starts. But yeah, I just wanted to make a video here to talk about the most recent changes we've done to the community patch, because I know a few of the players not been as active on the Discord and such, so they might not be completely up to speed on the changes we made. So yeah, again, I just want to talk through the changes we have made, maybe some of the reasons we've done it, what civs are going to benefit from this, what civs are going to get worse maybe potentially from some of the changes. And then after that, I'm going to do something, again, a little bit different. I'm not seeing anyone sort of do this in quite a while for Return of Rome, but I'm going to do my own tier list. So hopefully I don't upset any people here, but I'm going to try and do my own tier list of what I think are going to be good civs for the upcoming tournament settings, I guess. So the 1v1 settings and the maps pool that we have. I'll show you the map pool later at some point. And yeah, just go through what I think are going to be the top picks. And I guess conversely the bottom picks for the upcoming tournament. And yeah, talk about the winners and losers from the patch and go from there. So yeah, without further ado, I guess we'll get into the patch notes for the most recent beta update preview here. So yeah, just give a little bit of background. Yeah, you can see this has been something we've sort of been working on since the back end of last year, 28th of November. And this has been a sort of back and forth between a lot of the people community giving their feedback of things they'd like to see in their gaming changes. So none of this is set in stone, but it would be quite interesting to see this patch being played at a more competitive level in 1v1 setting, because I think for the most part this has only really been used for team game lobbies, the odd 1v1 here and there. But yeah, like I said, it'll be interesting to see, because quite a few of these changes may have like a reasonably large impact. We'll have to see how it pans out. But yeah, all these changes are in addition to the regular community patch. So I presume anyone watching this video is probably familiar with the community patch. I'm not going to go through all the chip balance changes there because there's quite a few of them. But if you want to check those out, I'll maybe put that in the description just so you can have a read through if you're not familiar. But yeah, just to go through our patch notes here for the current update. Straight in, Scout and Horseman. So yeah, Horseman is a big addition, and I'll talk about that more in a sec. But the Scout line is being given +4 extra bonus damage versus Priests. This is an additional change to follow up on the extra conversion resistance the Scout line is being given. And yeah, basically this is just to help civs out that don't have access to the Chariot and the Bronze Age. And the Scout only has that 3 base damage, so we felt it was fair to give them that +4 bonus, so that you're dealing that same 7 damage before tool pit upgrades, storage pit upgrades, I should say, the same 7 damage that the Chariot is doing for other civilizations, just to make that unit a little bit better at doing the anti-priest job there. And yep, so Horseman upgrade is going to be a new upgrade to the Scout, available in the Iron Age. It's quite a hefty food cost there, 1200, 500 gold. Quite slow 2.5 minute research time, so it's kind of a more not going to be an immediate thing you can put out straight in Iron Age. And well, also in the 1v1 setting, we may not see many games reach Iron Age, so maybe this isn't the biggest change for 1v1 settings, but it is going to be a nice option for all those civs that don't have access to the Chariot. You can see the stats here, and just to put this a bit in perspective, I personally think the stats are a bit on the weak side, just because the Bronze Age Chariot has 100 HP and 7 base damage, so this unit does just lose to 1v1 versus the Bronze Age Chariot. But the Horseman does have the bonus of some quite nice pierce armor and some extra damage against archers, so it's obviously going to be a lot better in those, what should I say, against those ranged units, of course. And yeah, so that yeah, late game, obviously this is still going to be nowhere near on the power level of the Scythe Chariot for the civs that do get the Scythe Chariot, but it just means that all these gold civs are going to have a better trash option in the later phases of the game, I guess. Moving on, Camel Rider and Heavy Camel Rider. So again, this is another addition. to the game, but their movement speed has been very slightly increased from 1.66 to 1.71, and this is just so that those camels can better get those engaged against those cavalry units that they're supposed to be countering, because at the moment we just felt that it was a little bit hard for the camels to get those engagements they wanted to. It's quite easy for the cavalry player to just run the units away from the camels and just switch into another unit, basically. So yeah, makes those a little bit more powerful. Yep, heavy cavalry upgrade has also been added to the Iron Age. Fairly reasonable, 500 food, 200 gold cost, couple of minutes to research. And you can see the stats here. And again, to put this in perspective again, the current camel rider does beat the heavy cavalry in Iron Age 1v1 at the moment. So the heavy camel rider is obviously just going to be able to do that job, but better. The heavy camel rider does still lose 1 versus 1 against the cataphract, but it is cost efficient against the cataphract. So, because obviously the camel rider is slightly cheaper than the cataphract, if you can maybe get that better mass, or you can just sort of outlast your opponent, you will eventually win out against cataphracts with the heavy camel rider, but you just won't win 1 versus 1. So you just need to be careful of that. Obviously, this is going to be quite a nice boost to the Carthaginians, Palmyreans, and Sumerians, who will get their own camel bonuses. But obviously, it's just a nice option for all these civs here. So again, another Iron Age tech, so maybe won't see much use in 1 versus 1. But yeah, a nice option for some of the civs there. Just a quick note, so those we've just borrowed some models from the Chronicles DLC to be placeholders for this unit, basically. This is basically insignificant change, I would say, to competitive play, but we saw in one of the recent Age of Empires 2 patch updates that they'd buffed the transport ship, so now in AoE 2 it just carries 20 straight up. Before you needed to research careening and dry dock to be able to get that, and we've thought we'd just match that similarly for quality of life for the transport ship and AoE 1. So the transport ship now carries a capacity of 10, heavy transport now doubled to 20, and now also the heavy transport ship is researchable in the Bronze Age instead of the Iron Age, and is slightly quicker to research as well. So like I said, I don't think I would be very surprised if we see a transport ship in the entire tournament. I mean, like I said, I've got the map pool here. Maybe on coastal, if someone like blocks off some of the crossings or something, we might see a transport ship being built. I can remember there's that funny clip we've got of Jesse building a transport ship on Ocean Ring. But I don't expect that's for later. We'll come back to that in a bit. Didn't mean to click that. But yeah, I expect this to have basically zero impact on the competitive 1v1 scene. It's more of a change for just casual games, I guess. This change, however, I do think will have quite a big impact. And it maybe seems unassuming. Villagers now move 10% faster, reaching the tool age. But yeah, I think, well, I've been kind of against this change for a while. I can remember it was being discussed a bit when we were introducing the needlework tech. And again, just for a bit of perspective, this is a bonus that does happen currently in the DE version of the game. You do just get this 10% bonus. However, in Return of Rome, I'm not a huge fan of this just because we have so many more defensive mechanisms in the game to help against early rushes, which is kind of the idea of this. We can garrison villages in TCs, and obviously we've done a bunch of changes in the community patch to soften the initial blow of those early AXA rushes in particular, which is where I think this makes the biggest difference. But yeah, there's a couple of reasons I'm not a huge fan of this. One is because it made a bit of extra work for me and Carver when we were sorting out the farming work rates, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later in the patch. But the second more significant thing I think is that this makes the villager it's only a very small amount, but it makes it just slightly faster than the axeman, which I think is going to make those early AXA tool rushes very ineffective at getting damage, as I think the AXA has a movement of 1 and the villagers will have a movement of, I think it's literally 1.01 with this in, but that's enough to, like, as long as you're paying attention, you'll see, if you see those early AXAs, you'll just be able to run those villagers away, click needlework and wait the 20 seconds for that to get in, and then you should be able to fight the AXAs off after that comes in. So I'm a little bit nervous that this is going to make just those initial AXA rushes a little bit too ineffective. Obviously, we've done a lot of work in the community patch to squash that power down, but I think we had it at a decent level before. But yeah, a lot of the players that we asked for feedback from for the patch supported this change. So we are testing it out, and it'll be interesting to see in a more competitive setting how much of a difference that does make. But I think this is quite a significant nerf to those civs that are like want to be very aggressive in the early game. Obviously, things like scout rushes and stuff, this won't make a huge amount of a difference. But yeah, for those initial axes, I think it definitely blunts that. So yeah, another sort of similar change. Wheel has been nerfed to only give 40% instead of 60%, although overall this is still going to be 50%. So it's only really a nerf from 60 to 50%, because obviously the 10 from here added to the 40. I personally wanted to nerf this a lot more, just because I feel like it's a little bit silly how fast villagers move with a wheel. Like I would have even nerfed this to like 30% or maybe even lower, to be honest. But yeah, so villagers going to be just slightly slower with the wheel now, but it's still going to be more or less mandatory pickup for every civ, regardless if you have chariots or not. And yeah, you can just see a list of the movement speeds before and after. So you can see here, before this change, the Assyrians had 1.58 movement speed on their villages, which if we go to the count, yeah, 1.66 is how fast cavalry generally move. So your villages were nearly moving as fast as the cavalry as the Assyrians. Obviously, it's still pretty fast, and it's still reasonably fast. You're still outpacing all the non-mounted units. And yeah, I feel like this probably could get nerfed more, but I guess we just wanted to do this in increments. Didn't want to go too hard too fast. So yeah, this is another change that could be quite significant. So now farms are no longer require the market to be unlocked. So you basically be able to build farms instantly as soon as you hit the tool age, assuming you've got your granary still. But almost everyone builds a granary in the Stone Age. So yeah, it's basically just will be unlocked when you hit the tool age for all intents and purposes. This, I'm not sure how much of a difference this change will actually make. Because I think in a lot of circumstances, a lot of players, they'll want to go into their slingers or their bowmen quite early in the tool age. And that often means that they'll want to put the market down straight away to get the stone mining in for the slingers or the woodworking and for the bowmen. So I think there's going to be a lot of instances where the market still comes down before any farms do, especially on citadels, where you basically put your market and either the stable or archer range, depending on your civ, and then you just go straight up to Bronze Age before you really make any farms. So I think there's going to be a lot of instances where this actually makes basically no difference. But the idea of this change is to try and smooth out that transition, of the food economy once all the natural food, like all the elephants, gazelle, berries, those all start running out. Just make it so you can sort of be adding in farms sort of gradually, instead of having to like be like, oh, my food's running out, get the market down, get all loads of farms down at once. I think this is going to be a quite decent buff to the civs that have good farm bonuses. So like obviously the Egyptians with the cheaper farms, Minoans with faster working farms, I guess, as well as the Palmyrians for similar reasons. It's just going to let them take better advantage of their eco bonus. But yeah, again, it'll be interesting to see how much of a difference this will really make. My gut is that in a lot of games, it won't make much difference at all, because again, like I said, you want those upgrades for your military units, as well as just the eco benefits of the upgrades. And also, if you build the market after you build farms, it means you won't be able to research domestication before putting any of the farms down, so you lose out a bit there. But yeah, so potentially quite a big change, but also at the same time, I'm like, maybe it isn't that big of a change, but we'll see. So next change. Okay, so previously we nerfed the infantry leather armor to take a little bit longer to research. So this was one of the changes we made to nerf the early axe rush. So now the archer and cavalry armors are going to match that at 45 seconds. They used to be 30. So again, this is another change which I think will basically make zero difference. It's basically just a tidying up change, to be honest, because the biggest bottleneck to getting bowmen out and cavalry out is obviously just having to get your archery range or stable down in the first place. So as long as players remember to just click these upgrades a little bit earlier than they would have to normally, it's going to make basically no difference. Yep, so moving on, a heavy horse archer, movement speed has been slightly decreased. So this value here is the same value as just the regular horse archer, and we decided there wasn't really any real reason for the speed of the heavy horse archer to increase, especially as like it's getting heavier, right? Because it's a more armored unit, so it didn't really make sense for it to go faster. I think potentially this could be nerfed more as the horse archer is like I'm not sure how fast ships are actually, but on land it's definitely the fastest unit, and probably, in my opinion, the most powerful unit in the later phases of the Iron Age. So maybe you could have that reduced a little bit down, because it's just one. If you still have gold available, I think it just is the most powerful unit in the game. But that just a small tweak just to bring that a little bit back in line for the maybe follow-up changes in the future. We'll see. Side chariot change, reasonably big change here. So this is, again, previously we removed the +1 armor that you got from the side chariot. And now with further nerfing, so in the base version of the game, you do 100% blast damage, which we nerfed to 80%, and we're nerfing that again to 70%. This might not sound like a lot, but because blast damage is affected by armor, this actually makes proportionally a much bigger difference. So if you run the numbers, if you're doing splash damage or blast damage, if you want to call it that, against about 2 or 3, maybe 4 units in those more clustered fights, this actually ends up being about a 20 to 25% damage drop, as opposed to the smaller change that this looks like. So it is quite a big reduction in the damage output that the side chariot is capable of. But obviously the side chariot is still going to be extremely powerful in very late game situations, just because it's the best trash unit in the game. There's no competition for that, essentially. It just means in that earlier phases of the Iron Age, when gold is still available, it's not going to be quite as an impressive unit there. So yeah, just a little bit weaker in the earlier phases of the Iron Age, but still going to be very strong later on, like I said. War elephants and armored elephants. So these are more quality of life changes. Essentially, search radius increased from 4 to 5. This essentially means when you just got it on an aggressive stance and set it in, this is kind of, once it kills its unit, it has the area around it that it will try and search for a new enemy to try and find, essentially. So it'll keep like actually following on and finding stuff to beat up. So yeah, just sometimes in late games, you just want to right click in your opponent's base and just let your elephants wreak havoc. So that will help a little bit more there. So it will cause a little bit less idle time for those elephants. And attack animation duration slightly decreased. So this will just mean that when you right click, the actual attack will be slightly quicker. The damage will come out slightly quicker. The actual damage output won't change, but it'll mean that like sort of microing the unit around won't feel as sluggish, and you'll like cancel less attacks by accident, essentially. So just small quality of life changes. Legionary. So we had previously given the Legionary plus a little bit of extra movement speed. I think this could have been extended to the Long Swordsman, also being an Iron Age swordsman unit. But yeah, this other change is to increase the health improvement from +40 to +60, so an extra 20 HP, just to let this unit keep a little bit more in line with other Iron Age units. I do think the swordsman line does get a little bit underplayed, just for how cheap it is. You can often use it as like a meat shield in front of whatever your other units are, but the unit can struggle a bit in sort of the Iron Age when some of the mega units, like the Centurion just absolutely massacres the Legionaries. But yeah, so it's probably only going to be much of a change to, I guess, the Chosen or the Romans are the only real civs that go for Legion. Obviously, a few other civs do get access to Legionary. But yeah, probably, again, it's an Iron Age change, so you probably won't see it coming out too often. Conscription has now been given to all civilizations, so a bit like urbanization and city watch. We just think it's just fairer to give all this tech to all the civs. Again, I think the biggest winners from this are probably the Chosen and the Romans, just because it means you'll be able to spam and try and get those number of legionaries up much quicker, because obviously with their half population space, so you want to try and spam and fill up that population space as quickly as possible, because that's the strength of the legionary, is how spammable the unit is. Obviously, it's just a bonus to all the civs. I mean, the Greeks with their Centurion spams is probably going to be a little bit scary. Yamato possibly the same with their heavy horse archers, which is maybe why the devs decided not to give the civs this bonus. But obviously, you still got to pay for the units, so yeah, just small improvement to all those civs. But again, just another Iron Age change. This change does make, it's not a huge change, but it will have some impact on a lot of the games that get played. Uh, Town centre cost has been increased from 200 wood to 250. We felt at the moment that since the return of Rome and town centres provide that extra defensive bonus meal to garrison villages inside, it just felt like a no-brainer that once you reach the Bronze Age and put the government centre down, that there's basically no point building granaries or storage pits at that point. Even though the town centre is a little bit more expensive in terms of wood, you're getting just so much more bonus benefits from the, like I said, the garrison space for defending, and also the ability to create more villages. That it just was a little bit too easy to just slap these all down everywhere, and then it just made it, yeah, the choice between this and the gathering point buildings moot, really. So just a little bit of extra cost there, not too much difference, but it just means in the early Bronze Age it'll make it a little bit harder to boom up. But other than that, probably won't change the game too much. So now specific changes, I should say, try and get the words out. So the Hittites now get access to the fishing ships. So they were previously the only civilization that didn't get this upgrade. Hittites have fallen out of favour somewhat as a water civ since they got their extra range bonus nerfed in the early ages. Yeah, and there are quite a lot of stronger water civs at the moment. So it's just, I think it's just an appropriate change. I don't think there's a reason the Hittites shouldn't have had this upgrade. Maybe if somehow in one of the map pools, like coastal continental, or maybe like coastal rivers and coastal ocean ring and Mediterranean, that would make the most sense. If all three of those maps get picked, maybe the Hittites are then being picked up as a water civ, but I think that won't make a difference. Really, there, maybe slightly bigger change. Obviously, Hittites are considered one of, if not the best, closed map civs, specifically on citadels. The wheel bonus, the research time has been nerfed slightly. So it used to be that it researched in half the time. It's now going to take 15 seconds longer, which just means it's not a huge difference again, but it just means that the Hittites will have that little bit extra time for their opponent to try and take advantage of their weaker earlier game on those maps before they can get that chariot archer death ball going that the Hittites like to do. So yeah, it basically gives your opponent an extra 15 seconds to try and get like a slinger rush or whatever through those walls and try and knock your opponent down. Palmyran civ bonus. So this is to balance out the increase of the base speed of camel riders. Their bonus has been a little bit nerfed just because the 25% bonus combined made those camels a little bit too fast, especially with the heavy camel upgrade now available. So that bonus has been nerfed down a little bit. So you can see this is what it was before 2.08, so now it'll be 2.05. So it's essentially more or less the same after those changes as it was before. So not a major change there. Sumerian team bonus, that's just been nerfed down to 20%, so that bonus still just gives a 50 wood discount. So arguably maybe we could have left this just because I think Sumerians are one of the weaker civs. It probably could have been left as 25%, but we didn't want to like change too many things at once. So again, maybe we could have left that, but yeah, just gives that same 50 wood discount, and that's just a few different wood prices there. So obviously Romans with a Sumerian ally now pay 180 wood instead of previous 135. But every civ is paying more wood for their town centres now. So now some fixes here. We've basically gone into the game files and found out, I think, essentially when they were converting some of the numbers from the DE values to their equivalent AoE 2 engine values, some of the tweak movement speed values and stuff didn't get changed correctly. So the Assyrians were actually getting slightly better than advertised bonus. They're actually getting 12% bonus speed instead of 10. So we've tweaked these values to be how they should actually be. And the same with zealotry, that was giving slightly too much speed to your villagers, as well as a weird bug that your female villagers were carrying less food than the male villagers. But I won't go too much to that detail, but essentially just those villagers will move a little bit slower. So one of the big changes, which will probably go completely unnoticed because it's in the background, most stuff, but is what's called work factors. So these in the games, this is something that the devs introduced into Return of Rome to essentially make up for the fact that the farming mechanics of DE are a lot different to how AoE 2 farming mechanics work. So obviously in DE, you just right click a farm and the farmer just stands there with his rake or whatever it is, I guess like a hoe or something, going back and forth, and he just stands on the spot, gets his 10 food, hands it in, and then just does that. In AoE 2, the farmer, when they right click, he'll move to a spot, or she, pick up some food, then move again, pick up a bit more food. And because of that, the devs had to try and balance some of the bonuses for things like the Minoans and the Palmyrans have faster working rates to make up for the fact that there's this extra movement factor. So essentially, the work. Well, this is very confusing, but essentially, the work factors try and make the AoE 2 farming match the DE farming so that they should be the same. And to just sum this up quickly, essentially what was happening is that after Wheel was researched, a lot of the Civ bonuses were making you gather too much food, and before Wheel was in, a lot of the Civ bonuses were actually not gathering enough as much as they should. So, for an example, the Minoans bonus is 10%. We found it was actually about 8% before Wheel's research, and after Wheel was researched, it was actually around something like 15-16%, so it was way too high. So we've tweaked these work factor values so essentially that you're gathering the correct amount of food now. Again, this is kind of only really affects sort of like later games where there's a lot of farming eco set up, but we just felt that like the devs had tried to put these values in and then just hadn't quite done all the proper testing. So we've put all the testing in ourselves. We literally done like hundreds of runs, maybe not hundreds, but at least 100 runs to try and get those sorted out. So that's all the changes. So just quick wrap up because I've already been talking for quite a while. So hopefully this video won't go for too long. So obviously the new units being added in, but again, I don't think those are going to be that huge of a difference for a 1v1 tournament just because not many games reach the Iron Age. But yeah, I think this 10% faster villagers is going to make some of the more aggressive civs a little bit worse on this patch, and they're going to some civs especially going to suffer from that, which I'll talk about, I guess, more in the tier list when I get there. The farm change, again, like I said, I think this is more. I don't know. I'll be interested to see how much of a difference this will make. And then I think that is kind of it. All the other things are kind of minor in comparison to that. So, yeah. And that leads us on to the next part of the video, which I'm sure you've all been waiting for. And yeah, so this is going to be a tier list, like I said, for what I think are the best civs in the game based on this version of the game with the new patch and in a 1v1 setting and sort of taking into account the current map pool. So obviously some civs are way better in water maps and stuff, but it's going to be sort of like an overall view of the civ in general is how I'm going to do this. Obviously it's going to be a little bit depending on what civs get drafted in specific games, but I will talk about that. So yeah, and just anyone who's not familiar, S tier is obviously the best civs in the game going S tier, and D is the worst civs. So I guess, yeah, I'll just do this in alphabetical order. So which means we start with the Assyrians, and I laugh because I know if anyone watches my streams and stuff like that, they'll know I really don't like the Assyrians. I think they are one of the worst civilizations in the game, and I did do a little bit of thinking before recording this video of where I was going to put some of the saves, and I think I think it is just going to go straight into the D tier. I was thinking maybe it isn't, but I think it is going to go in the D tier, and the reason for that is I just think there's basically no map at no point in the game where Assyrians is like one of the top civs in the game. The only time they are really strong is, well, yeah. Basically the only time they really are strong is if they get to that Bronze Age where they can start massing up chariot archers. But then their bonus, they're still weaker than like other chariot archers. It was just simply because they don't get nobility. So the chariot archers are just weaker than the Hittites, the Egyptians, even the Babylonians. They just have no bonuses for water maps, so they're not very good there. They basically have no early. They're faster firing bowman bonus is kind of countered quite hard in the tool age because of the slinger being such a strong unit. And the 10% extra movement speed on the villagers, like I said, I feel like it does make a difference to help against like the initial AXA rushes, and it is useful for like early exploration. But outside of that, it's a pretty non-factor. And the other thing is that I think the Assyrians are the biggest loser out of the horsemen being a unit now. Like I said, in 1v1 settings, we might not reach the Iron Age as often, but if we do reach the Iron Age, the Assyrians will want to be going for their siege with those cheaper siege upgrades, as well as their ranged units. And the horseman is really good at dealing with both of those things. Obviously, the Assyrians do get the cataphracts and the legionary, but they're both like the cataphracts misses out nobility, like I said, for the chariot archer. Legionary misses out all the pierce armor upgrades, which makes them feel a little bit weak. As long as you've got like some ranged option, they're very easy to deal with. And yeah, like I said, I just feel like other than like the one situation where they've got like their chariot archers set up in the Bronze Age, it just feels like they're well, not as good as any Civ, really. Babylonians, we'll move on quickly. Babylonians are still one of the weaker civs. I like the Babylonians, but I think they are objectively a weaker civ. They have been doing well, yeah. Since Return of Rome, they've been doing a lot better, just because that extra bonus than the chariots pierce armor, which is why they're quite good into the Assyrians, just because their chariot archers just beat Assyrian chariot archers. I think it's going to go in the C tier. They're just a little bit too slow out the gate. The cheaper market tech bonuses are quite nice, but they only really have very small resource savings as you go through the game. It's not like a huge bonus at any one point. They are still decent on closed maps, so like I can imagine this Civ getting picked a little bit more often if, like, say, both Citadels and Inside Out are both picked, then Babylonians may shift up the picking order a little bit. But most of the times, I kind of just see the Babylonians as like a weaker version of the Egyptians in a lot of cases, because the extra HP on chariots for the Egyptians is just better than the pierce armor the Babylonians get, and then like the cheaper farms bonus is just better than the market bonus. Yeah, so it's only really the closed maps where they really stand out. They do obviously get access to the Scythe Chariot in really late games, which is another reason the Assyrians are bad. They're the only civ in the game that gets Chariot and doesn't get Scythe Chariot, so Babylonians don't have that as a late game option, so they can be nice there. But yeah, it's just on those more open maps, they will struggle against the stronger civs there. And again, on the water maps, they're not going to be so strong either. Carthaginians next, and that's going to be an easy A tier for me. Basically, ever since DE, when they got their new bonus of the extra starting resources, they've just been a very solid civ in the game. And I was a little bit down on this civ, like when Return of Rome came out. I still thought they were good civ, but I thought maybe they weren't quite as good in DE because, like, we were tending to see longer tool ages with the changes to the tool age balance. And that meant that those initial starting resources were like relatively not as big of a factor because the games were going slightly longer. However, since more of the community patch changes, because a lot of more games are tending to go to the Bronze Age now as well, that with the Carthaginians you just unlock basically all your bonuses that are pretty crazy in the Bronze Age for the military ones. So you just get so many military bonuses to so many different units that it just feels like you have an answer to like basically everything in all situations. Obviously, the camels get that extra HP for free straight out of the gate, which is one of the few units that you can build right at the very start of Bronze Age, and just means you very heavily counter any other cavalry civs. And you get the free nobility as well straight away as soon as you build that government center. So even just your regular cavalry usually have extra HP compared to your opponents earlier on in that Bronze Age. And then also you get extra HP on those hoplites, which it's not a unit you tend to see as much in the earlier phases of Bronze Age from the Carthaginians, but if Civ matchup goes that way, you're just going to have that strong melee unit, which basically beats every other melee unit 1v1. And like I said, because you have that strong starting position with the extra resources in the early game, it's quite often that the Carthaginians can be like the first civ to get to bronze. They can normally get themselves a good tool age. If they don't win the tool age, they usually get to the bronze age a little bit faster. So even though they don't have like a huge economy bonus, it's only that initial resources. I feel like just all the military bonuses gives them so many good options in the bronze age that they're like uh, good at all phases. And then that the extra HP on the hoplite line is just like absolutely insane in the late game. Once you get aristocracy in the Iron Age, the Centurions are just so tough to take down, as well as you get the extra HP on the elephants as well. Elephants a little bit less of a 1v1 unit, I'd say, but obviously the Carthaginians don't get chariot units, which is their one downside really, is like in the uber late game, if you run out of gold, then they do fall away then. But it feels like on basically, well, yeah, like, and that's the other thing I was going to say, they're really good on a good variety of maps. The open maps, the mixed sort of hybrid maps, they're still really good because that extra wood can get you that dock up nice and early. I think they're a little bit, obviously, on the pure water maps, like on Mediterranean, for example, they wouldn't be as strong there just because that 50 wood can only go so far, right? But like on hybrid maps, they're really strong, and they can still be decent on closed maps as well. Obviously, they're not as strong there just because it tends to be their chariot archers that excel there. But yeah, on every other map, they're just very, very strong. And like I said, it just feels like they have an answer to everything in the Bronze Age, and the buff to the scouts helping them out with priests, which was probably their main weakness in the Bronze Age. The extra power in the scout, I think, helps the Carthaginians quite a lot there. So yeah, moving on. Chosen, for me, obviously, is a KT favourite, but I think again for me, the Chosen is another of the weaker civs, and I think it's actually what Chosen is one of the civs that is going to be affected most by the villager speed change, just because they're obviously one of the best civs at getting that AXA rush in with the extra HP axes, as well as this cheaper storage pit techs. You want to try and get those early axes in, because that's your like power spike as the Chosen. You don't really have much out of like an eco bonus or anything outside of that. And I think, yeah, those initial axes being less effective is going to hurt the Chosen quite a lot. Obviously, like I said, they do benefit from like the late game bonuses of extra conscription and legionaries being buffed a little bit, but I think again in a 1v1 situation, it's very unlikely you're going to get to that position as against the more competitive civs basically. But yeah, and they do still have that legionary spam in the late game, which can be very strong if it does get going. So, which I think just about floats it above the Assyrians, as well as just the cheaper storage techs, making that like sort of initial rush possible. It's like Chosen can actually do a pretty decent scout rush, because obviously they get the cheaper scout techs as well from the storage pit, sorry. Which I feel like just gives them enough to be above the Assyrians in the C tier there. Egyptians, so I think potentially Egyptians may be the biggest benefit the most from the new patch changes. They do get the Scythe Chariot slightly nerfed in the late game, but the farm's no longer requiring a market. Gives you much quicker access to the farms, and then also they get the heavy camel in the Iron Age as well now, which is just like Egyptians have like one of the fewest options in the Iron Age, so it's just nice to have that. I think then they're still not quite an A tier civ, but they're they're probably a top B tier civ now. Obviously, on more open maps, they're still going to be behind a lot of those stronger civs that have a strong Stone Age bonus. But I think they're going to be much quicker to get into a game now, just because that farming bonus is going to be able to apply much more quickly, and they're going to have like the smoothest transition of that food economy in the sort of like mid to late tool age. And obviously their chariots are still very, very strong. Their priests still very, very strong. I get like the Hittites, one of the best. It's kind of funny that these three civs are all together because they're sort of the best closed map civs. But yes, one of the best closed map civs in the game. Potentially stronger than the Hittites now, just because the Hittites had that small nerf, and I feel like the eco bonus for the Egyptians could make quite a big difference. And I think the Egyptians are generally better all round than the Hittites are. I guess maybe you could argue the Hittites. Well, we'll get to the Hittites when we get to the Hittites. But yeah, I think the Egyptians are going to be a very solid beat here now, and wouldn't be surprised to see the Egyptians sneak into like the last few picks of a BO5 draft. I think they're pretty solid civ right now, and yeah, again they benefit from early aggression being a little bit weaker as well. Which moves on to the Greeks, who I guess you could argue for similar reasons are a little bit stronger now. I do think the Greeks are a step down from the Egyptians though, just because the Greeks don't really have they don't have an eco bonus. They do have the fast. Sorry, I was trying to put this back down here. They do have the faster working TCs, which are going to be a bit more expensive now. So you could argue the Greeks aren't going to be able to take as much value out of that. The Greeks do have a very nice fast bronze. They probably actually have the best fast bronze, just because the faster working TC means you research Bronze Age faster, and you get the market cheaper as well. I just think the Egyptians and Hittites are still, slightly stronger on those closed maps, and the Greeks are a little bit less versatile than the other civs. The hoplites are very threatening, but I think they're not on the same level as like the Hittite chariot archers. I think it's going to be like top of C tier, and they're very good, still very good civ on the closed maps, but I think they struggle a bit too much on other maps. I think the Egyptians, like I said, with that farm bonus, are going to tend to do a lot better. Which moves us on to the Hittites. Like I said, they are one of the best closed map civs still. They have been slightly nerfed because of this slower researching wheel now, which possibly makes them a lot more vulnerable on citadels. Like we've seen on Inside Out, that the players can take advantage of the Hittites with slinger rushes and stuff like that. Citadels tend to be a little bit more safe just because you're further away from your opponents. You've got those medium walls instead of the small walls. They're still going to be very strong. I think that the Hittite chariot archer in the Bronze Age is still probably the best unit in the game. It's like one of the few units you could just mass that unit and just like as a single unit and get away with it. Normally you should really like mix in a couple of different unit types to cover counters. And then the biggest issue for chariot archers is usually defenses, and it just so happens that Hittites have some of the best stone throwers in the game as well with that bonus there. Obviously, they still suffer quite a lot on more open maps. They don't have any eco bonus at all, but they are still okay-ish on water maps. I don't know. I think it's going to make maybe. I think this is a little bit skewed because I'm not putting many in yet. I think it's probably a low B, and it might get a little bit. I think it's still above the Greeks. Just like I said, just that chariot archer in the Bronze Age is just absolutely insane. But then the Civ has like too many other weaknesses to stop it from going higher. I mean, like in the Iron Age, they're still a very strong Civ as well. They have fully upgraded Scythe Chariot as well as access to those heavy horse archers with that +1 extra damage as well, and as well as their strong catapults again. They have loads of units in there. Iron Age, they're really, really strong. But in 1v1 settings, earlier game tends to be more important, so the Hittites going to stay down here. So Latvia, again, I think this is one of the civs that is going to be affected quite a bit by early aggression not being as strong. I still think it is an A tier civ, but I think it's going to be a lower A tier civ for me. I know like in past tournaments, people would have considered this maybe like up here along with the Shang. But we have done quite a few nerfs to the Latvia now, and I think the addition of this extra movement speed is going to knock the Latvia down a bit. Just because obviously the Latvia still have one of the craziest earlier games of any civ in the game with the berry bonus, faster gathering berries, and the faster producing military. It's just they're a civ that are very reliant on getting a lead from that early aggression. And now I think it's less likely that they're going to be able to get that advantage. And once like the berries have run out, you've got no eco bonus anymore. And then your other bonuses outside of the military production bonus aren't really as impactful at later stages in the game. So I think they're still A tier just because they're a very strong early game civ on those open maps. But they're not great on other maps outside of that just because they're like Bronze Age isn't that strong for closed maps in particular, and they don't really have much of a water bonus either. So my brain's like almost telling me this is a low B, a high B, sorry, but my heart's telling me that can't be true. So it's going to stay at A tier for now. But I think this Civ, I think it'll still be high picked, just because there's a little bit of bias from when this Civ was so strong at the start of Return of Rome. But I think it has fallen in power level a little bit here. Okay, Macedonians now, and I like this Civ. But the more I look at like their actual tech tree and their bonuses and stuff, the more I think I just think the Civ's actually just bad. I think the reason I like the Civ is because obviously I come from more of an AoE 2 background, and obviously you get the scout on AoE 2, which you don't get in AoE 1. So I think having the extra line of sight on the villages in the early game is a pretty nice bonus. And it can help you like with exploration, find those extra resources and stuff like that. But obviously it's not the same as having an actual eco bonus. And then a lot of their bonuses just kind of feel a little bit underwhelming compared to a lot of other civs. Obviously, yeah, like basically in the early game, outside of the line of sight bonuses, you don't really have anything going for you. We have made it so the team bonus of the faster working archery range, that does help you a little bit earlier in the game with bowmen and stuff like that, massing those up, and then also in the Bronze Age to get compies out. But like in the Bronze Age, they don't have nobility for their cavalry. They don't have camels or chariots as an option. They have their bonus of extra, I mean, yeah, but extra pierce armor on the hoplites and the extra conversion resistance. But it feels like in the Bronze Age in particular, it's quite easy to respond to Macedonian hoplites by just making hoplites of your own. And then the Macedonians don't have like an eco bonus. So if you just are a Sith with an eco bonus and make hoplites, you're just going to beat the Macedonians. In the late game, those Centurions or Phalangites can be a little bit scary. But again, if you just have the Phalangites and Centurion yourself, you can just counter the unit. And like yeah, against the Carthaginians, I feel like the Macedonians just can't do anything. And I think, yeah, the more I think about it, I think this may actually be the worst Civ in the game. There aren't any maps where they really stand out. The Assyrians, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the Assyrians, but if you can get that chariot archer mass going, they can be strong. Whereas I don't feel like the Macedonians have a unit like that where they can just like try and mass it up and you're just like, oh no, we're stuck. No. I think unfortunately it hurts me to do this, but I think this is going down in the D tier here. And I'm sorry for anyone that, yeah, is a Macedonian fan. Like I said, I feel like I like the Civ, but it's just the more I look at it and the more I think about it, the worse I feel like this Civ is. And unfortunately, it's going to stay down in the D tier there. Monoans. So obviously, if there's water maps, Monoans still S tier. On those water maps, they just have too many bonuses. The cheaper docks, cheaper warships, and cheaper fishing ships is just too much of an advantage. I've argued before, and I still think it's true, that the Phoenicians can keep up with the Minoans like in the earlier phases of the game, since the Minoans had those discounts nerfed in earlier ages. But once you get to the Bronze Age on the water maps, there's just no match for the Minoans still. So they probably still need some tweaking for them to be a bit fairer on water maps. It's quite often that if water maps do get picked in a map draft, that people do just ban the Minoans. But obviously, it's not just water maps in the map pool, so we've got to take some other stuff into consideration. Like I said, I think the farm bonus does benefit the Minoans, as in not requiring markets to build your farms, does help the Minoans quite a bit, because it means you get to that faster gathering farmer bonus a lot quicker, so that extra 10% farming bonus is quite nice there. And like I said, they are still just the best map on water civs. They're not as good on the closed maps, just because the composite bowman is quite easily handled with stone throwers on that map. But I think just because they're so strong on water maps, that still means they've got to be at least B tier still. And the farm, but I think they are going to just slip slightly ahead of the Hittites, just because I think it's like arguable whether what civ is the best civ on the closed maps between Egyptians and Hittites, where it's just clear that Minoans are the best on water maps. And like I said, I think the farms not requiring a market anymore helps the Minoans quite a bit in the Tool Age. Though they're obviously still going to suffer against the stronger early game civs there. But yeah, if you can get that compy mass up, it can be quite. They're still a very strong unit. It's just, yeah, obviously Stone Throwers is a very strong counter to that unit there. I think that's fair to leave that there. Palmyrans, a bit of a weird civ. I think this is another civ, though, that benefits a lot from early aggression, probably not being as strong. And again, from the farm bonus being a thing. And honestly, I feel like in the late game, this civ is actually just broken. Like the gather extra 25% gather rate on villages is just absolutely insane. They are not as strong on water maps, which I've said before, just because obviously the eco bonus doesn't apply to fishing ships. So it's like you're kind of losing out a bit on your villager bonus there. But they are still very strong on closed maps, although they're not considered a top tier pick. But I think Palmyrans are slept on quite a bit. I think they're actually a pretty solid civ, especially now, like I said, I feel like the early aggression is going to be tempered a little bit. I think it has to go below it definitely has to go below the Egyptians for me still, just because I feel like the Egyptian Bronze Age is just so strong with the chariots that even with a good eco bonus, it takes, like, you have to get a bit later into the game for the Palmyrans to like pick up their pace with their eco. And I'm thinking, just because Minoans are just so strong in those water maps, I think I'm going to place it here just above the Hittites, just because I think the Palmyrans is actually a pretty good civ on almost any map, as long as you can survive that early game, which is why it can't be a top tier civ to me. But like, I think because you're more likely to survive that early game now with the faster moving villages, especially with your extra armor on the Palmyran ones, you're going to have more cases where you're going to be able to take advantage of that economy bonus, and again, easier access to farms. I think Palmyrans will be. I'm hoping. I think they're reasonably strong. Well, stronger than they have been, and I wouldn't be surprised if it sneaks in a little bit higher in the picking order. Persians, I think, again, this is another civ that loses out a lot from the early game aggression being tempered a bit. Obviously, the Persians, they're mostly known for that scout rush, which is still going to be very strong. But I think I've just been down a lot on the Persians a lot recently anyway, just because outside of that initial scout rush, once the hunt runs out, they just feel like a very bad civ after the early Tool Age. A lot of their bonuses just don't feel like they really do anything. Like the faster moving elephants is basically a complete non-factor in 1v1 games. On hybrid maps, they're still okay, just because you get that faster firing, or some water maps, in fact, just because the faster firing scout line can be quite good there. But I think this is going to be a lower tier civ. They feel quite similar to Lac Viat, but Lac Viat just have a way better tech tree just because they have access to chariots as well as the option of hoplites. I don't think they actually can upgrade past hoplites as the Lac Viat. As Persians, you don't even get the hoplite at all. You have very limited Bronze Age options. And it just feels like if you don't get ahead in that early game, you just kind of stuff. They are still very strong on more open maps like Sahara and Oasis, just because of that scout rush, which I think gives them a little bit back. Maybe just because they are decent on water map civs, maps still, sorry. Maybe it sneaks up. I don't think it's B tier for the Persians for me, though, just because, yeah, I think they're probably the worst civ in the game on the more closed maps, unless you can somehow get an early rush off. Just trying to think where I think I would I rather play the Babylonians? These two civs feel very similar to me, just because, like I said, they have. Persians has got to be better just because they get their bonus in the Stone Age. I think it's going to go there. No, I think it's going to go there just because, like I said, the water maps, they're on the hybrid maps, they're still playable on that sort of map. Maybe it is. Maybe it is higher than Greek still. But yeah, like I said, I think the Persians. It's a difficult one for me to place this. Um, but like I said, they are top tier on those open maps, but they fall off very quickly there. I think they still struggle into things like the car. Yeah, I think this is fair. I think they basically struggle against all the very strong early game civs, and now again that the early the villagers a little bit going to be a little bit harder to pick off from those eco civs. Persians have one of the weakest eco in the game after the hunt runs out. Yeah, I think I'm going to settle there. I'm still thinking about is the Babylonians better just because their Bronze Age is quite nice to the chariots, and also they get access to the side chariot in the Uber late game. I think I'm going to leave it just because it is 1v1 settings. Persians are going to sneak to there. So Phoenicians, this is very easy for me compared to that. It's going in the middle of hit. Phoenicians, as everyone knows, is one of my favorite civs in the game. They're just very, very versatile. They've got very open texture all the way up to Bronze Age, and their wood bonus just makes them good on basically every map in the game. They're not like a top, like the most top civ on any map, but they're competitive on basically any map. Late game, they do fall away a little bit there in the like really late game. They still get access to the side chariot, but it's missing a couple of upgrades from the storage pit. You get those elephants that you can spam whilst you still have the gold. But yeah, basically up until the Bronze Age, just very good on basically any map. Good on water maps because of the wood bonus, obviously. Good on more open maps just because that eco bonus is just very strong. Just a very solid civ all round. And I think just because they have that longer lasting eco bonus, that now puts them ahead of the Latvia in my mind there. So I don't think I need to say too much more about that. Romans. Romans have always, since the start of Return of Rome, have kind of felt like a best of the rest civ. Obviously, in DE, in the early games of DE, early days of DE, Romans were still considered very strong civ. But since they had their bonus of 15% cheaper buildings nerfed to 10%, they've not felt as strong. And in Return of Rome, with a lot of more games kind of reaching that Bronze Age, I think the Roman Bronze Age isn't one of the best, just because they don't really have. I mean, obviously they get access to their swordsman unit then, but in the very early Bronze Age, it feels like it's quite hard for swordsmen to be effective, and you need to get those numbers going. So in the Iron Age, again, Romans are very strong again, just to get access to the fully upgraded side chariot, fully upgraded centurion, and obviously they're very strong legionaries, which is being helped by a couple of getting access to conscription, extra health on the legionaries. But they're still not like a top civ on any particular map. Like I said, I think they're just kind of a best of the rest civ. And I think it's going to be a B tier somewhere for the Romans. I think Romans are probably a civ that we could think about restoring their 10% bonus back to 15 just to give them a little bit more life again. And I think they are just weaker than the Palmyrans now. And are they weaker than the Hittites? I think the Hittite late game is still better than the Roman late game. Romans are better on the more open maps, but then like the Hittites are absolutely insane. Yeah, I think Romans are going to go bottom of B tier here. They're not like a bad civ by any means, and again, you'll often see the Romans being picked up later in drafts just because they have a pretty solid bonus still, just saving that wood. It's nowhere near as good as the Phoenician bonus, obviously, and I think the Phoenician Bronze Age is just way stronger than the Romans, as well as the Phoenicians just being way stronger on water, because obviously the wood bonus for Romans only applies to buildings, so and whereas the wood bonus for Phoenicians applies to all wood. So I think that's fair. Shank, this is going to easily go up here. Still no really debate about that. 40 food villages is just still absolutely insane. It's just the best early get bonus in the game, and it continues to be good into the later phases of the game. The only time Shang really drops off is in the very late phases of the game, where they're missing a few like key techs on quite a few of their units, like they don't get alchemy, um, but they do still get things like Scythe Chariot and some other options. They're just like not quite as powerful as some of the other civs that have like strong military bonuses in the later game. But on basically every other map, well, yeah, and in 1v1 setting, you don't even reach those late phases that often. So they're just the eco bonus is just insane for the Shang. I think we probably should look at doing something to the Shang again at some point. And I think they're definitely just the best civ in the game at the moment still. And yeah, I don't think I really need to add much more to that. Cimmerians, again, is another civ I'm not a huge fan of. You could argue, again, like I've argued for the Palmyrians, that this is a civ that will benefit quite a bit from early aggression being not as effective. Also, they get the extra food on their farms, which is going to be more accessible now. But the extra food on the farms is like a much slower bonus. Like you only really get the bonus when other civs farms are running out and they need to reseed. Your Cimmerian farm lasts a bit longer, right? So it's only later on where you get that bonus. They do have access to heavy camo now, but again, that's another late game difference. So I think they're still gonna, yeah. There isn't really a map where you'd think of Cimmerians as a top tier pick on. And I do have some like the catapult bonus is quite nice. The stone fire faster firing bonus. But yeah, I think they're just the early game's a bit too slow, and then they don't have like a mega good Bronze Age like the Egyptians or Hittites do. So I think this is gonna be a C tier pick. It's gonna be below the Greeks to me. I think the Greek hoplite just stands out above anything the Cimmerians can do. I think it's going to be below the Persians, possibly, just because the Persians do have some maps where they are top tier in. Yeah, I think this... Actually, no, I think Babylonians are better as well. In fact, are the Chosen better? Chosen do get the legions. The Cimmerians still get the Scythe Chariot, although it's not the strongest Scythe Chariot. I think it's quite close between these two. Chosen can do a little bit more in the earlier phases of the game. I think those two is sort of like interchangeable. It's kind of preference. I'm going to leave it there, I think. Yeah, I think I'll leave the Cimmerians there. And then Yamato, last but definitely not least. I think this is probably going to go here for me, just after the Carthaginians. Yamato are just very strong civ on a lot of maps. I think the only map that they kind of aren't great on is the closed maps on Citadels, just because they're Bronze Age. Oh, well, Citadels Inside Out, stuff like that. Just because their Bronze Age isn't that strong. Like a lot of their bonuses don't really make a huge difference there, I feel. Obviously, they do get the cheaper cavalry line, but I don't feel like cavalry is a go-to unit on the closed maps. But on every other map, their bonuses are just crazy strong. Their team bonus is the best team bonus in the game by far, in my opinion. And they're one of the best sims at being able to do a scout rush with their cheaper stable and cheaper horsemen, and then follow that up with bowmen straight after because they get the cheaper archery ranges. On the more open maps, they do struggle a bit against the strongest early game civs, just because obviously they don't really have a Stone Age bonus. The only Stone Age bonus they have is the faster working fishing ships, which obviously on just open land maps isn't really a thing. But then as long as they can survive that initial rush at the early game, which I've argued with many other civs, it's going to be a lot easier now. The Yamato just catch up really, really quickly. It's really easy for them to save 100, 150 wood straight away on archery ranges and stables. And they, like I said, they get cheaper scouts. And then they don't get many unit options throughout the game, but the ones they do are very good. The cheapest cavalry line in the late game. And if games do reach the Iron Age, the cheaper horse archer as well as the cheaper upgrades for the horse archer. They might have the most accessible heavy horse archer in the game, and like I said, I feel like that is the best unit in the game. So as long as there's gold in the game, Yamato are going to be going nicely. As well as Yamato, we're going to get the horseman upgrade cheaper now as well, which is quite nice from there. And on water maps and hybrid maps, they're one of the best civs in the game. And hybrid maps, especially, if you can get a map, sometimes you can get inland maps where you have the weird little pools at the side of the map. If you can get a dock up on there and get your fishing boats in there going away, Yamato are arguably the best civilization in the game on those maps. And yeah, water maps, the extra HP bonus on those ships can rival any good water civ. Probably only falling behind, well, yeah, the Minoans, maybe the Phoenicians, a bit stronger just in the earlier phases, but I think in Bronze Age that their HP bonus probably catches up again. And yeah, just a very solid civ on basically all maps. So wow, I've been rambling for over an hour now, so I did hope I wasn't going to last this long, but I had quite a lot to talk about, so hopefully that was interesting for you, and I hope I've not made people too upset with this tier list here. So like I said, this is just like a general power level for the map pool for the upcoming 1v1 tournament. And for those who are looking forward to it, I will be streaming all the games I can do live. Obviously, I'm still working, so if people schedule games for when I'm at work, I'll have to do replays and whatnot, but I'll try and stream as many games as I can from the tournament, and I hope everyone enjoys that. It should be starting, it's currently planned to start on the 26th of May, which is a couple of weeks from now, just less than a couple of weeks. And if you're on the Discord, I'll put a link to the Discord in the description if you're not on it already. We'll have more updates and notifications for when games are going to be going live and such, so keep track of all that going on, and yeah, hope to see you guys soon on the streams, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye for now.